Janet came back from the work trip with a gift in her suitcase and betrayal in her diary. She handed me the wrapped souvenir with a soft smile, one of those, nothing's wrong smiles she thought I wouldn't notice. I took it, said thanks. I watched her walk into the bedroom like nothing had happened. But the moment she shut the door, I reached under the couch and pulled out what she'd forgotten to take back with her. A thin, blue diary with a snapped elastic band and pages bent from travel. I'd already read it 3 nights ago. She didn't know that. She thought I hadn't noticed her change. The quiet, the hesitation, the way she flinched every time her phone buzzed. But I'd seen it all, and worse, I'd read it in her own words. I can't stop thinking about Bobby. This trip shouldn't have felt like a dream, but it did. Another page. William doesn't know how distant he's become. Bobby notices everything. That line hit harder than I expected. Even the second time, I stared at the page while she unpacked in the next room, wondering how long she'd been pretending. I remembered every phone call she cut short, every just tired excuse, every forced laugh. And now I have the proof. Janet walked out minutes later like nothing had happened, hair tied, face fresh, her usual home self. "You okay?" she asked, seeing me on the couch with the TV off. "Fine," I said. "You?" She hesitated, then nodded too quickly. "Just tired." Of course. That night, she fell asleep early, again. This time, I didn't just lie beside her. I sat in the living room with her diary open in my lap. It wasn't anger anymore, it wasn't even a heartbreak. It was a slow, deliberate stillness. A kind of betrayal so quiet it didn't need to shout. Page after page, she wrote about Bobby, how he noticed her earrings, how he asked about her childhood, how he said the city lights made her eyes glow. She'd never felt more seen. 10 years, and I'd never missed a birthday. I remembered how I learned to cook just because she loved handmade gnocchi. I remembered the rainy night I stayed on the hospital floor when she sprained her ankle, sleeping upright beside her bed, but he noticed her earrings. The last entry was dated 2 days before she returned. Bobby asked if I was happy. I didn't know what to say. I think that's my answer. I closed the book and stared into the dark hallway where Janet now slept. Maybe she'd loved me once. Maybe she didn't anymore. But whatever part of her felt something for Bobby, she'd written it down like a confession, then left it under my couch like I was never meant to read it. But I did. And tomorrow, she'll wake up next to a man who already knows she's gone. People used to say William had a quiet kind of loyalty, the type that didn't announce itself in grand gestures but stayed present through every ordinary moment, solid, consistent, almost invisible. He never thought that would be his weakness. He thought that was love, stability, safety, but apparently it made him forgettable. He met Janet at a campus bookstore in their junior year of college. She was crouched by the bottom shelf, trying to reach a copy of The Bell Jar. The way her fingers danced just above the spine, refusing to ask for help, caught his attention. William wasn't the kind of guy to flirt with strangers, but something about the moment felt like a prompt he couldn't ignore. "You mind if I grab that?" he asked gently, crouching beside her. She blinked, startled, then gave a half laugh. "Yeah, actually, it's been ignoring me for 5 minutes." He slid the book out with one smooth motion and handed it to her. "Sylvia Plath?" Janet smiled. "Depressing but honest. Don't judge me." "I won't," he said. "I think honesty's underrated." That's how it started. With a book, a comment and a connection that bloomed slowly over library walks, late-night noodles and soft music shared on buses. Janet was electric in the way only truly guarded people can be, warm when she wanted to be, cold when she needed space, but William never saw her detachment as rejection. He thought it made her real. Humans, honest, they never had one of those explosive, can't breathe without each other romances. Theirs was built on small routines. Coffee mugs labeled his and hers. Post-it notes with lame puns. Sleepy texts like, "Get home safe, you left your charger, again." After graduation, Janet got a job in marketing, and William became a junior developer at a modest tech firm. It was never glamorous, but it was theirs. They moved into a third-floor walk-up with leaky pipes and a balcony too small for even one chair. Still, they made it work. On rainy nights, they'd sit with their backs against the wall and drink instant cocoa in chipped mugs, watching headlights blur across the wet street. That was 5 years ago. Now they lived in a nicer building with a doorman and central heating. They had a joint savings account, matching health insurance, but the silence between them had grown too thick to ignore. William didn't remember exactly when things began to shift. Maybe it was gradual, the kind of slow erosion that eats at walls not with earthquakes, but with time. Janet began staying out later, not dramatically so, just an hour here, a meeting there. She blamed the promotion, said she had more on her plate. He believed her. Of course he did. Bobby entered the picture about 8 months ago. On paper, he was just her junior, an assistant, barely out of grad school, still excited by office coffee machines and branded hoodies. William had heard his name in passing. Bobby helped fix the projector. Bobby ordered the lunch trays. I made everyone laugh in the elevator. William didn't care. Until he did. It started with the way Janet spoke about him. At first, it was casual. Bobby spilled soda all over the boardroom table, you'd have died. Then it became admiring. You know, Bobby really gets people, he's just observant. William nodded through those comments, smiled when she laughed, even teased her once. You sure this guy doesn't have a little crush on you? Janet had rolled her eyes. He's a kid. But something shifted after that. She stopped mentioning Bobby as much, but her phone stayed glued to her hand. She smiled at texts she didn't show him. She laughed in the kitchen while cooking, and the phone screen tilted away from him. William didn't push, he didn't want to be the insecure boyfriend. One night, while folding laundry, he saw a name flash on her lock screen, Bobby. No last name, just the name. 3 laughing emojis. William didn't ask. He folded her blouse quietly and placed it in her drawer. He told himself he trusted her. Then came the trip. It was a work conference in another city. 4 days. That's all she said. I'll be back before you even miss me. William smiled, kissed her forehead, and helped carry her suitcase to the Uber. The goodbye was soft, too soft. The second night she was gone, he found the diary. He wasn't snooping. He dropped the TV remote between the cushions and found it wedged in the corner, blue cover bent, ink bleeding edges telling stories even before he opened it. He stared at it for a long minute. Then opened the first page. We landed early. Bobby insisted on carrying my bag. He's so annoying, and sweet, and too easy to like. William's stomach sank. Dinner was too long. We shared wine, laughed too much. I need to remind myself this isn't a rom-com. He flipped through more pages, each one like a paper cut. William's message was sweet. He's trying, but I feel like I'm living 2 different lives. Bobby makes me feel seen. I didn't know how much I missed that. William didn't throw the diary. He didn't scream or curse. He sat very still for over an hour, the book open on his lap. At some point, it got dark outside. At some point, the wine Janet left half drunk on the counter had gone warm. He didn't move. He waited until she came back to say anything, but he didn't say it. She'd walked in with that soft smile, the same old bags. She told him the conference was busy, but productive. He asked if she was tired. She said, a bit. She asked how he'd been. He said, same as always. They sat on the couch that night and watched an episode of a show neither of them liked. But William didn't forget the pages. Not the one that said, he asked me if I was happy, and I couldn't answer. Not the one that said, if William ever found out, I think it would break him. And the worst part is, I'm not sure I'd feel it the same way. That was the sentence that fractured something inside him. And yet, he didn't confront her, not right away. Why? Even he didn't know. Maybe part of him hoped she'd admit it. Maybe he wanted her to come clean without being forced. Or maybe, deep down, he wanted to see how far she would go with the lie. Every morning after she returned, he waited for a confession. Instead, he got eggs and silence, coffee and awkward smiles, a hug before work, a kiss that landed 2 inches too far from his lips. He noticed. He noticed everything now. She deleted her messages when she thought he wasn't looking. She turned her phone face down. She took calls in the hallway, and still, he said nothing. William wasn't the kind of man who broke things. He fixed them. That was his flaw. He fixed too much for too long, until now. Now he was counting her sighs, Watching the way she stirred her tea, the number of times she looked at the door during dinner, he saw how her fingers hovered over her phone like they had somewhere else to be. He wasn't William the boyfriend anymore, he was William the spectator, watching the final act of a play he didn't audition for. And Bobby? Bobby was a name in a notebook, a smiling emoji, a slow infestation that grew in the spaces William had thought were sacred. Janet hadn't cheated with her body, yet, but her heart was already in someone else's inbox. And the man she used to love now knew the truth. She just didn't know he did. William wasn't angry, not the way people expect you to be after betrayal. It was worse. He was calm, and that calmness was cold, like frost on window glass that never melts, even under sunlight. It was the kind of quiet that follows after something inside breaks for good. The betrayal wasn't just what Janet had written in her diary, it was how easily she came back and pretended nothing happened, how she laughed at breakfast like she hadn't just spent 4 days thinking of Bobby while William watered the houseplants and reheated her leftover soup. It was 2 weeks after her return that the tension finally cracked open, not in some grand explosion, but over a missed dinner. She had promised to come home early. "I'll be there by 7, Janet had said, pulling on her coat. "We can cook together like old times, yeah?" William nodded, keeping his voice steady. "Yeah, sounds good." He marinated the chicken, laid out the vegetables, even chilled the wine. At 7:45, he called her, no answer. At 8:10, she messaged, "Sorry, Bobby and I got pulled into a client thing, running late, don't wait." He stared at the screen until it dimmed, then he picked up the plate, scraped the food into a Tupperware box, and put it in the fridge. That night, she returned just after 11. Her heels clicked softly across the floor like she was trying not to wake someone. When she saw him awake on the couch, her face shifted instantly, from tired to defensive. "You're still up? I waited. I told you I'd be late. You said not to wait. I chose to ignore that." Janet dropped her bag near the door. "You're mad." "No," William said. "I'm disappointed. There's a difference." She scoffed. "Come on, Will, it's not like I went partying. I was working." "Bobby was with you?" "Yes." "You two always work this late?" She paused, and it was the pause that said everything. "I don't owe you a play-by-play of my work life," she said carefully. "No, you don't," he replied. "But it would have been nice if you came home to the dinner you promised." Janet walked to the kitchen, opened the fridge, saw the packed containers, and closed it again without touching anything. "I'm exhausted," she muttered. "I can't do this tonight." He nodded. "Then don't." She stopped. "What does that mean?" "It means I've already done it alone." She didn't ask what it was, maybe because she knew, maybe because naming it would have made it real. Instead, she disappeared into the bed. Room without another word. The silence returned. That same silence William had been suffocating in ever since she got back. The silence that wasn't peaceful, it was poisoned. And now it was permanent. The next day, he woke up to an empty apartment. No note, no message, just the faint scent of her shampoo lingering in the hallway. When he checked her social media, she hadn't posted anything new, but Bobby had. A picture of an espresso machine with 2 small mugs. Caption, "Late nights, but great company." No tags, no faces, just an implication. William didn't react, he didn't comment, he didn't even save the photo. But something shifted, a line crossed not by evidence, but by intuition. Janet returned home that evening and found him organizing the bookshelf. "You never reorganize," she said lightly. "I do it when I can't sleep." She hovered in the hallway, then asked, "Did you eat?" "I did." Another silence. "I brought dessert," she added, holding out a paper bag. "Your favorite. Appreciate it." But he didn't take the bag from her hand, he waited, watching. "Are we going to pretend everything's okay forever?" he asked finally. Janet set the bag down on the counter. "I don't know what you want me to say." "Say something honest." She looked tired, truly tired this time, not the fake kind she wore like armor. "Work's been hard, there's a lot going on." "Don't give me work," he said. "You're pulling away, Janet, I'm not stupid." She blinked. "You think I'm cheating on you?" "I think," William said slowly, "that you are in love with someone who isn't me. And I think you've been trying not to admit it, even to yourself." She didn't deny it, and that hurt more than a confession ever could have. "I care about you," she said. "I do. I always will." "Do you love me?" Her eyes dropped. I don't know. That was the moment. Right there. That was the beginning of the end. He could have yelled, could have cried, could have demanded answers, but instead, he nodded. "Thank you for telling the truth," he said. She stared at him like she expected punishment, but he had none left to give. He slept on the couch that night, and when she left in the morning, she didn't say goodbye. The following week was a slow unraveling. They moved through the apartment like strangers, occupying space without touching it. Dishes remained undone, lights stayed off longer. William kept reading the diary at night, sometimes rereading the same until tries not to torture himself, but to understand, to trace her steps, to figure out where the story changed. One night, he asked her directly, "What do you talk about with him?" Janet looked up from her laptop, startled. "What? You and Bobby, what do you talk about?" "Everything," she said before she could stop herself. William nodded. "Do you ever talk about me?" She didn't answer. Another night, he came home early from work. She wasn't expecting him. He walked in and found her on a video call with Bobby. She didn't hear him come in. He didn't interrupt, just stood there, quietly, listening to her laugh at something on screen. A soft, familiar laugh, the one she hadn't used with him in months. "Okay," Bobby said through the speaker, "get some sleep, you look tired." "Will do, thanks for staying up." "For you? Always." William walked out before she turned around. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Janet noticed the look in his eyes. "You saw the call?" He nodded. She didn't apologize. Later that week, Janet's sister Lisa came by to drop off a birthday gift. She was the only one in Janet's family who truly liked William. While Janet was out of the room, Lisa leaned in and asked quietly, "You okay?" He shrugged. Lisa watched him for a moment and said, "You deserve better than this quiet misery." William looked at her. "It's not that simple." "Yeah," she replied. "That's what Janet said too." It was the first time anyone had said it out loud. That Janet had been speaking about their problems to others, framing her guilt, preparing her narrative. That night, William took the diary and placed it on the kitchen counter, open, exposed. He didn't say a word. Janet came home. "I saw it. I froze." "You read it?" "I did." She looked like she might collapse. William didn't move. "You forgot it under the couch." She walked over, closed the diary like it could still hide what was written. "I never meant for you to read that." "But you meant to write it." She didn't reply. William said, "You loved me once, that much I know." "I still do." "Not like before," he cut in. "And maybe that's okay, but don't stand here and tell me I imagined it." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't wipe them, she just nodded. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know. I didn't cheat." "But you left." Silence fell between them like ash. That night, Janet packed a small bag and left to stay with Lisa. William didn't stop her. She didn't ask if he wanted her to stay. It was over. Not with screaming, not with slamming doors, just with the quiet closing of a zipper, the hush of an elevator or door, and a slow echoing silence that filled the apartment once she was gone. And the worst part? He still loved her. He just didn't trust her anymore. And that was the real betrayal. William sat at the edge of the bed they used to share, his palms resting flat on the mattress, fingers digging slightly into the cotton sheets as if he could feel some lingering trace of her warmth. But the bed was cold. It had been cold for a while now, long before she left physically. Her absence was old, familiar, practiced. The only difference now was that it had shape. The silence in the apartment was heavier than usual, not quiet like a peaceful morning, not empty like a forgotten space. It was the kind of silence that listens back. That fills in the pauses between thoughts and stretches them longer than they're supposed to go. That makes the walls feel like they're leaning closer every minute. William had always thought of himself as emotionally stable, rational, steady. He wasn't the kind of man who panicked, who screamed, who fell apart easily. But now he understood something new. Some kinds of pain weren't loud, some didn't demand attention, some pain just settled in like a roommate, quiet, permanent. He got up slowly and walked into the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and stared at the cupboard where Janet used to keep her cereal. The box was still there, unopened. Her favorite, those honey oat clusters she insisted were healthy even though they were 60% sugar. He opened the box and stared inside, still full. He poured a bowl, sat at the counter, and ate it dry. No milk, just the soft crunch of betrayal in every bite. It didn't taste like anything. He wondered if Bobby liked cereal, if they'd had breakfast together on that trip, if Janet had ever poured Bobby a bowl like this and laughed when he said it was too sweet. He shouldn't be thinking about Bobby. But the truth was, Bobby wasn't just a person now, he was a ghost that lingered in William's kitchen, in his hallways, in his head. And worse, Bobby wasn't even malicious. He was just there. Thoughtless, perhaps, but not evil. William hated him more for that, because it meant there wasn't a villain, just inevitability. He walked back to the living room, sat down on the couch, and stared at the TV remote. Then at the coffee table. Then at nothing. At some point, his hand reached for his phone. He opened Janet's messages. The last text she'd sent was, "Staying with Lisa a while, don't worry about me." That was it, not, "I love you," not, "I'll come back," not even, "Let's talk." Just that she wouldn't be here, and that he didn't need to worry. But he did, not about her, about everything else, about what came next. About how long it would take for her things to disappear. About whether she was texting Bobby right now. About how love turned into this slow withdrawal no one announces. About how a 10-year relationship could break and the world would go on turning like nothing happened. William placed the phone face down on the table, but the thoughts didn't stop. He thought about calling her. He wouldn't, but he thought about it. He imagined her voice, soft, controlled, still in damage control mode, still convincing herself this wasn't cheating because she never crossed a certain physical line. As if betrayal had a body count, as if the things she'd confessed in ink didn't sew out because they were never spoken. He leaned back, eyes on the ceiling. He had loved her. Still did, in a way. But he didn't recognize her anymore. Not this version. Not this emotionally absent ghost who said sorry like it could fix foundation cracks. Every time he tried to rest, sleep became a waiting room, a place where memory loops on repeat. He remembered their first apartment, the first dinner she ever cooked him, burnt garlic and too much salt, but she laughed so hard it became his favorite meal. He remembered the first time she cried in front of him and let him hold her like he mattered. He remembered how she once whispered, "You're my safest place." Now he wasn't even a destination, just something she passed through. There was a dull ache in his chest that never left, not sharp, not loud, just a quiet pressure, like a stone resting on his ribs. He walked into the bathroom and looked at himself in the mirror, same face, same dark circles that used to mean long hours at work, now they meant long nights trying not to spiral. He touched the edge of his reflection's cheekbone, stared into his own eyes. "You okay?" he whispered to himself. He didn't answer. Outside, the wind hit the window harder than usual, or maybe he was just noticing it more now. He made a cup of tea and sat with it, hands wrapped around the warmth. It helped for a few minutes, then the thoughts came again. Did she ever plan to confess? Would she have told him if he hadn't found the diary? Was she planning an exit all along, or did it just happen, one moment of attention with Bobby turning into a second, then a pattern, then a preference? William hated how much he tried to make sense of it, as if betrayal needed logic. It didn't. It just needed distance. And now he had it. He looked through his photos, not because he missed her, because he missed what they used to be. In one picture, she had on his hoodie, too big for her frame. She had toothpaste on her lip and was making that mock-serious face she did when pretending to lecture him about flossing. He remembered taking that photo and thinking, this is what happiness feels like. Now, that image looked like a stranger. He locked the screen. At work, he was quiet, not cold, just disconnected. Colleagues asked him if he was okay, he nodded, smiled even, said something about allergies or lack of sleep. They believed him, or at least they stopped asking. He wondered how long it would take before the weight lifted, or if it ever would. Maybe grief wasn't always about someone dying, maybe it was just about mourning who someone used to be. He couldn't decide what hurt more, the things she did say, or the things she never did. The slow ghosting of effort, the half-truths, the long stares at her phone. There was no closure, just a quiet collapse, and he lived in the debris. Some nights, he thought about writing her a letter, telling her everything, how it felt, how deeply she cut him, how he would have forgiven anything if she'd just looked him in the eye and said, "I'm lost." But she didn't. She just left. He thought maybe she didn't have the tools to unpack what she did. Maybe that's why she wrote it all down, because she couldn't say it aloud. Maybe Bobby had just arrived at the wrong time in the right place, and William was the sale. Collateral. He still couldn't hate her, and that was the problem, because she had already let go. He just hadn't. Yet. One morning, he stood on the balcony and watched the city wake up. People on bikes, children in uniforms, honking cars, a man feeding pigeons with practiced ease. The world still moved. And William stood still. He thought, this is what being forgotten feels like. But then he realized, he wasn't forgotten. He was just not chosen anymore. And slowly, painfully, he began to understand the truth. Janet didn't break his heart in one moment. She wore it down with silence. With small dismissals. With withheld apologies. With every time she looked at Bobby like he was new, while looking at William like he was just expected. That night, he slept for the first time in 3 days. It wasn't deep, it wasn't peaceful, but I slept, and that was something. He dreamed of nothing, and woke up to sunlight, and in that moment, for the first time in weeks, William realized the quiet wasn't just empty now, it was his, and he could finally breathe inside it. 2 weeks had passed since Janet left the apartment. William hadn't texted her, she hadn't called him, not once. The silence was mutual now, and it didn't feel like tension anymore, it felt like confirmation. Most days, he kept himself busy. Work, laundry, cooking. Mornings were easier, but nights still dragged like broken elevators, slow, stuck between levels, heavy with invisible weight. He had stopped checking Bobby's posts. He'd unfollowed him silently. Not blocked, he didn't want to give them the satisfaction. He didn't care what filtered version of love they posted. He had enough truth scrawled in the lines of that forgotten diary. But then came the email. It arrived on a Thursday evening, just as he was closing his laptop. The subject line read, "Confidential HR inquiry, immediate attention required." William blinked. It was from his company's internal HR department. He clicked it open. "We've received an anonymous complaint regarding alleged misconduct during your prior employment with Lennox Co. The claims include inappropriate behavior and breach of confidentiality. Due to the serious nature, your access will be limited until a preliminary review is completed." His breath hitched. Lennox Co. That was Janet's company. He stared at the screen, rereading the lines. Anonymous complaint. Inappropriate behavior. Breach of confidentiality? What the hell was going on? He leaned back slowly, chest tightening. He had never done anything inappropriate, never shared insider details, never even discussed sensitive material outside of official channels. This had to be personal, and there was only one person who had reason to take it there. Janet. He picked up his phone, thumb hovering over her contact, then stopped. No, he wasn't going to ask her. If she did this, she wasn't going to admit it anyway. He needed clarity. So he called someone else. The next day, William met with one of the IT leads from Lennox, an old colleague he'd worked with on a system migration, back when things were still civil. Over coffee in a public cafe, the man leaned in. "Off the record," he said. "HR was pushed hard on this, from someone at the top." "Janet?" William asked. The man hesitated. "Her name's not in the complaint, but the wording, it's specific, too specific for someone outside leadership." William clenched his fists under the table. "What does the complaint say?" "That you exported internal databases before resigning, and that you leveraged proprietary insights to gain employment at your current firm." "That's a lie," William said coldly. "A complete lie." The man nodded. "That's why I agreed to meet you. I've seen your work. I know your ethics." "Why now?" William asked. "Why come after me now?" The man sighed. "Honestly, I think someone's trying to sabotage your future offers, preemptively stain your name, like a quiet blacklist." William sat back, stunned. Janet was trying to bury him, or protect Bobby, or both. Either way, this wasn't just heartbreak anymore, this was a calculated attack. And he finally understood, this wasn't about closure, this was war. He didn't cry, didn't panic. He got home, opened a blank document, and started writing. Not a response to HR, a timeline, a full, detailed, time-stamped record of his resignation, exit documents, emails and backups, every last move he made before leaving Lennox. It took him 6 hours. By the time he was done, the document had embedded links, folder paths, screenshots, and formal summaries. He sent it to his company's legal counsel with a calm, 2-sentence note. Please see the full documentation attached. These allegations are false, and I'm prepared to dispute them formally if needed. He hit send. Then he sat back, stared at the ceiling, and whispered, "You really want to go there, Janet?" He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, HR acknowledged his defense, legal review, no promises yet, but his tone, his facts, they all painted him clean, and still, his chest was heavy. He wasn't scared of losing his job. He was scared of how far Janet was willing to go just to rewrite the story. And then came the twist. On Sunday evening, William's doorbell rang. He opened it to find Bobby, standing alone, no smug grin, no sarcasm, just wide eyes and a slight tremble in his hands. "I need to talk," Bobby said. William didn't move. "Why the hell would I let you in? I didn't know she'd go this far." That stopped him. "Go where?" Bobby stepped back, pulling out his phone. "She said you stole code, that you were trying to tank her firm. She said if I didn't testify against you, she'd tell HR I was the one who leaked documents to you during your time at Lennox." William's jaw locked. "She used me as the fall guy," Bobby said quietly, "and I let her, because I was too blind to see what she really was." William didn't respond, he just stared. "She made me feel needed," Bobby said, barely above a whisper. "She said I was different, that I made her feel alive, but once you were gone, she changed. Cold, controlling. Everything became about revenge, not love, just damage." William crossed his arms. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I saw the complaint draft, she wrote it on my laptop, forgot to log out, your name, your timeline, fabricated screenshots, she faked emails." A pause. "I took photos." William narrowed his eyes. "Why now?" "Because I'm not the bad guy in this story," Bobby said, voice trembling. "But she's making me look like one, and maybe I deserve it for how I acted before, but not this." He pulled out his phone and handed it to William. On it, clear photos of internal HR complaint drafts, metadata logs showing Janet's credentials, and a folder of falsified screenshots she had saved under her desktop alias. William exhaled slowly. "You're telling me all this like it'll fix what you two did." Bobby looked away. "It won't, but maybe it stops her from doing it again." William handed the phone back. "Email it to me, everything, tonight." "I will." "You'll testify if needed?" Bobby nodded. "Yes." "Good," William said. "Now get off my porch." Bobby looked like he wanted to say more, but he didn't. He just turned and walked away. That night, William opened the files and verified everything. Time-stamped edits, email headers, even Janet's typo habits. It was all there. He didn't feel relieved, he felt confirmation. This wasn't just a breakup, this was betrayal rewritten as victimhood, and he had just been one chapter in a much longer story Janet was writing, but not anymore. He attached the files, sent them to legal with a new header, "Perjury evidence attached, I won't be quiet anymore." The storm was here, but now he had the map. William had never set foot in the Lennox Company headquarters after his resignation. He didn't think he ever would again, but now he stood outside the revolving glass doors in a pressed grey shirt and black slacks, holding a folder in one hand and a flash drive in the other. The security guard gave him a confused nod but let him pass when he showed the appointment slip from legal. Janet had been summoned too. The company's HR department had scheduled a joint session for both parties after the complaint and counter-evidence had grown too large to ignore. William didn't pace, he didn't check his phone, he just waited in the meeting room, perfectly still, a shallow breath in his chest. When the door opened, Janet stepped in. She looked perfect, hair tied in a clean ponytail, soft blush on her cheeks, a navy dress that fit her like it was tailored just yesterday. Her expression was unreadable. For a moment, she looked like the same woman he used to wake up next to. Then she saw him. Her lips parted just slightly, as if to speak, but she said nothing. She sat down across from him. Across the table sat 2 members of the HR Compliance Division and 1 lawyer from Internal Legal. This meeting, the HR lead began, is to clarify the allegations submitted and the counterclaims now brought forward. Both parties have submitted documentation. Today, we will address the inconsistencies and determine if further internal investigation is necessary. Janet's expression didn't flicker. William watched her like a man watches the final minutes before a verdict, calm on the outside, but fire roared beneath. Let's begin with the original complaint, the HR lead continued. Miss Fairchild, you claimed that Mr. Wren exported proprietary company data during his resignation process and used it for competitive advantage. Yes, Janet said clearly. I provided evidence. The HR lead turned to William. Mr. Wren, you've denied this allegation and submitted a full export log, resignation timeline, and a rebuttal file that contradicts the screenshots presented. You've also provided a flash drive with counter-evidence alleging fabrication. Is that correct? It is. Can you confirm the source of this flash drive? I can. Bobby Howard, Miss Fairchild's assistant, provided me with these files. At the sound of his name, Janet's eyes shifted. Slight, but enough. You're lying, she said instantly, voice sharp. William didn't react. He slid the flash drive across the table. Metadata, access logs, timestamps, password recovery traces, all traced back to your device. Janet's fingers curled slightly into her palm. The legal advisor opened the files on the conference laptop. Everyone leaned in as the screen displayed a folder labeled Complaint Draft REDO. Within it, 4 documents, each one a version of the HR complaint Janet had submitted, one dated before William even left the company, another with edits using phrases like, if he says anything, I'll frame it as a misunderstanding. Janet's face went pale. I never wrote those, she said. William didn't blink. They're from your IP, your device, your account. Someone could have planted them. Then explain the email drafts, William said calmly, or the messages to Bobby, or the screenshot where you ask him to make sure no one questions the truth too hard. The room went silent. The HR lead leaned back. Miss Fairchild, we'll need to investigate this evidence further. If the complaint was falsified, this constitutes a severe breach of policy. Janet's lips parted again, but this time, no sound came. She looked at William like she didn't recognize him. Like the man she once manipulated now stood immune to her presence. He didn't look at her the way he used to. There was no softness, no sadness, just silence and restraint. I think we've heard enough for now, the legal advisor said. William stood. Then I'll go. Janet's voice caught him just as he turned. William. He paused. Not out of curiosity, but because it was the first time she'd said his name in weeks without a layer of bitterness behind it. I didn't think it would go this far, she said. He turned halfway, looking over his shoulder. You planned it to go far enough to bury me. I was angry. You were guilty. She swallowed hard. You walked out without saying goodbye. I read what you wrote, he said. I had nothing left to say. I didn't love him, she whispered. Not like you think. But you tried, he replied. And when you couldn't make him fill the space I left, you tried to erase the one who did. Janet blinked quickly. It wasn't like that. He gave her the smallest nod. It was exactly like that. He left the room before she could speak again. Outside the building, the sun was brighter than he remembered, or maybe it just felt that way because everything inside him had finally stopped spinning. He walked 2 blocks to the cafe he and Janet used to visit on Sunday mornings, ordered his usual, sat by the window. For the first time in months, the coffee didn't taste like memory, it just tasted like coffee. That night, he got a message from Bobby. Bobby. They're suspending her. Internal review starts Monday. They might press charges if they trace everything. William. Thanks for backing the truth. Bobby. I should have never been part of it. I was stupid. William. You were used, just don't forget it next time. Bobby didn't reply again. William turned his phone off. 3 days later, he was invited to a private office at his current job. Inside, the company director and their legal advisor. "We've reviewed the incident thoroughly," the director said, "and we're closing it. No findings against you. Your documentation was pristine." "Thank you," William said quietly. The director smiled. "We're also moving you up, officially, senior systems architect, new pay grade, new corner office." William blinked. "Really?" "Some people fall apart during storms," the director said. "You documented, defended, and stood your ground. That's the kind of mind we trust to lead our systems." William nodded, stunned. "I appreciate that. Also," the director added, "one more thing." He handed William a plain envelope. Inside, a formal apology from Lennox's board, signed, sealed. "They know they can't undo what happened," the director said, "but that letter clears you in every way, legally, professionally, permanently." William ran his thumb over the seal, then tucked it into his bag. That night, Janet showed up at his door. No warning, just the sound of her knuckles against the wood like a question that shouldn't be asked. He opened it. She looked like herself, but smaller. Not physically, emotionally, like she didn't fit her own body anymore. "I heard you were promoted," she said. He nodded. "I was." "That's good." Silence. "Do you want to come in?" he asked. She shook her head. "I just wanted to say it, out loud." "Say what?" "That I was wrong," she said, "about everything. You knew that before you sent the complaint. I didn't expect you to fight back." William smiled faintly. "You thought I'd let it happen. I thought you still loved me enough not to retaliate." "I did," he said. "That's why I never retaliated. I defended myself." Her breath caught. "You hate me now." "No," he said. "Hate is loud. What I feel now is peace." She swallowed. "I'm sorry, William." He nodded. "I know." She stepped back. "I won't come back again." "You shouldn't." She nodded again, then turned and walked away. No begging, no breakdown, just a quiet exit. And that's when he knew. The story was truly over. Not because it ended in fire, but because it ended with nothing left to burn. 6 months later, William stood on the rooftop terrace of his new building, looking over the skyline he used to associate with pain. Now it felt like an altitude. He wasn't the same man who once sat in silence beside a woman who was already emotionally gone. That man had been dismantled, rebuilt, and reinforced with something Janet never expected: resolve. After everything that happened, most people assumed William would disappear into bitterness or isolation. Instead, he built. He had accepted the promotion, of course, but he didn't stop there. He took the severance from the false accusation and invested it into a quiet side project he'd been sketching out for years, a security integration firm focused on corporate compliance and trace protocol. He named it Wren Systems. Subtle, quiet, and sharp. Within 4 months, his company had closed its first contract, ironically, with one of Lennox's biggest competitors. And that was just the beginning. A month later, he received a call from a PR coordinator at a tech conference. Lennox's name had come up as a speaker partner. Would William like to host a talk under Wren Systems' banner? He smiled when he said yes. Janet hadn't been fired. She'd been suspended, then quietly demoted and reassigned. Lennox didn't want scandal, but her professional reputation had been shredded behind closed doors. The internal whispers were enough. She was no longer invited to strategy meetings, she no longer led teams. Bobby, surprisingly, had been let go during the same reshuffle, not because he'd exposed her, because he was no longer trusted. William wasn't surprised. Janet didn't call again, not after the last conversation on his doorstep, but he knew she watched. Her name still viewed his LinkedIn updates. She still followed Wren Systems from a burner account he'd traced easily. She saw his press releases, the contracts, the interviews. But the real revenge didn't come from success. It came from the silence. The absence of any attempt to reach out once she realized she had no leverage left. And then came the moment he didn't plan for, but welcomed all the same. A former investor from Lennox reached out to William privately. They were planning to pull capital and shift portfolios. They needed security infrastructure for their spin-off brand. Someone reliable, the man said. Someone not Janet. William didn't blink. I'll draft the contract personally. The deal closed within a week, and it came with one final gift. The investor wanted a clean slate, and that meant access to Lennox's old compliance history, full data migration, and security handover. It included Janet's entire disciplinary file. William didn't intend to weaponize it. Until she made one last mistake. She applied for a new job at a firm Ren Systems was quietly vetting for security services. Her resume went through. No red flags were raised. Somehow, Lennox had buried the complaint from official records. William received the candidate list in the onboarding files. Janet's name was there. He stared at it for a long time. Then sent one email to the compliance lead of the hiring firm. No exaggeration, no embellishment. Just 3 attachments: the falsified complaint draft, the confession recording, and Lennox's final review memo. He didn't sign it. He didn't need to. 2 days later, Janet's application was declined. The next morning, Ren Systems received a quiet thank you package from the client, and a doubled contract renewal. It wasn't rage, it wasn't vengeance, it was symmetrical. Janet tried to erase his future. He didn't just protect it, he rebuilt it so thoroughly that she couldn't touch a single corner of it ever again, and that was how he wanted it. No final call, no apologies, no closure speeches. She was done. Not because she ran out of damage to cause, but because William no longer existed in a world where her damage could reach him. One night, he passed the old cafe they used to visit. For a moment, he stood outside, remembering the window seat where they used to sit, knees touching under the table. It didn't hurt. It just existed. Like an old scar that no longer aches. But it still remains. Inside the cafe, someone else sat in their old spot. He walked on. Weeks later, he received an anonymous envelope at his new office. Inside was a small folded letter. No sender name. Just handwriting he hadn't seen since she wrote in that navy blue diary. You were always better than me. I just didn't know how to live with that. I'm sorry I couldn't love you the right way. I hope the silence has been kinder to you than I ever was. No name, no plea, no return address, just those words. William stared at the letter, then folded it once more and dropped it into the shredder, not out of spite, out of completion. There was nothing left to say. The next morning, he stood in front of the Ren Systems team as they prepped for another merger project. He was calm, focused, sharp. A new hire asked him during the team huddle, "Sir, what do we do when the system gets corrupted from the inside?" William smiled faintly. "We don't panic," he said. "We log everything, patch what matters, and we make sure the system never forgets what broke it." Later that evening, he sat on his rooftop again, alone, but not lonely. He watched the stars come out above the glass towers, his mug warm in his hand. Below him, the city pulsed with life. And somewhere out there, Janet was living with the weight of her own pages, the ones she wrote, the ones he never burned, but never needed again.